Good evening, and welcome to Kenya News Update today. I'm your host, and we're diving deep into a story that has brought both relief and skepticism across the agricultural heartland of Western Kenya. After days of crippling industrial action, the nationwide strike by sugar factory workers has been suspended. This follows intense negotiations between the Ministry of Agriculture and the Kenya Union of Sugar Plantation and Allied Workers, Gov't. The government has made a significant pledge, 1 billion shillings to address the workers' grievances. But is this a genuine solution or merely a temporary fix for a deeply ailing industry? Tonight, we unpack the deal, the decades-long crisis, and what this means for thousands of workers and the nation's food security. We'll examine the numbers, hear the perspectives, and ask the tough questions about the future of Kenya's sugar sector. Stay with us. Let's begin with the immediate crisis. The industrial action, which began on Thursday, January 29th, brought operations to a grinding halt at four key factories: Muhoroni, Nzoia, Sony, and Chemehlil. These aren't just factories, they are the economic engines of entire regions. Workers walked off the job demanding payment of unpaid salaries and statutory deductions that had accumulated over months, and in some cases, years. The strike was not just about wages, it was about dignity and survival. For a sector that employs tens of thousands directly and supports millions indirectly in the sugarcane belt, this was a critical moment. The suspension of the strike came after marathon talks, with the government's 1 billion shilling pledge serving as the key bargaining chip. But to understand why 1 billion shillings is both a lifeline and a drop in the ocean, we must look back at the troubled history of these mills. The story of Kenya's state-owned sugar companies is a chronicle of mismanagement, debt, and unfulfilled promises. For over 2 decades, these factories have been operating under a cloud of insolvency. The government has repeatedly stepped in with bailouts, but the structural problems have persisted. High production costs, competition from cheap imports, aging machinery, and political interference have all contributed to the decline. The workers, often caught in the middle, have borne the brunt through delayed salaries and benefits. This most recent strike was a symptom of a much deeper systemic illness. The factories are not just businesses, they are part of a social contract with the farmers who supply cane and the communities that depend on them. When they falter, entire counties feel the pain. The government's new pledge raises an immediate question: how does this 1 billion shillings fit into the larger financial abyss? Let's put that number into context. The 1 billion shillings pledged is a significant sum, but it must be measured against the staggering debts these companies carry. According to recent audits and reports, the combined debt of these state-owned sugar millers is monumental. We're talking about figures in the tens of billions of shillings. To visualize the scale, let's look at some key numbers. The total debt burden for these companies is estimated to be over 10.8 billion shillings. That's 10 times the amount just pledged to suspend the strike. Furthermore, previous government allocations for revival, like the 12.5 billion shillings set aside in the last financial year, have often been slow to disperse or insufficient to cover the gaps. So, while 1 billion shillings addresses immediate salary arrears, it does little to tackle the mountain of debt that chokes these companies daily. Now, let's break down what the 1 billion shillings is intended for. The agreement between the ministry and Gov't specifies that these funds are for the clearance of salary arrears and statutory deductions like NHIF and NSSF. This is crucial because unpaid statutory deductions mean workers and their families are without health cover and pension contributions, a dire situation. However, the pledge is just that, a pledge. The workers have returned to their posts on the promise that the money will be processed and hit their accounts. The timeline for this disbursement is now the focal point of all attention. Will it come in days, weeks, or months? History has taught these workers to be cautiously optimistic. Past bailouts have sometimes been delayed or arrived in trickles, failing to provide the comprehensive relief needed. The success of this deal hinges entirely on the government's prompt and full delivery of the funds. But the financial woes are only one side of the coin. The other is the very viability of the sugar industry in Kenya. We have to talk about market dynamics. For years, local millers have complained about being undercut by cheap sugar imports, both legal and illegal. The Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA, safeguards allow for a certain quota of duty-free sugar, but there have been persistent allegations of abuse and smuggling that flood the market. This depresses prices for local sugar, making it hard for our factories to compete. The government has imposed tariffs and restrictions at times, but the problem persists. This creates a vicious cycle. Factories can't sell their product at a profitable price, they accumulate debt, they can't pay farmers or workers, and the quality of local cane farming suffers. It's a perfect storm that no single 1 billion shilling injection can weather. Let's bring in the perspective of the farmers. Sugarcane farmers are the foundation of this industry. They invest time, land, and resources into growing cane, often on credit with the promise of payment upon delivery to the factory. When the factories are struggling, payments to farmers are delayed, sometimes for over a year. This cripples rural economies. Farmers cannot reinvest in their farms, purchase inputs, or pay their own laborers. The frustration has led to protests and even uprooting of cane in search of more reliable crops. The government's intervention, therefore, isn't just about factory workers. It's about stabilizing the entire value chain. If farmers lose faith and abandon sugarcane, these factories will have nothing to mill, rendering any financial bailout completely pointless. The health of the farmer is intrinsically linked to the health of the factory worker. Now, let's consider the political dimension. The Sugar Belt is a politically significant region. The timing of this strike and its resolution cannot be divorced from the broader political climate. President William Ruto's administration has made agricultural revitalization a key pillar of its agenda. A prolonged strike in such a critical sector would be a major embarrassment and could erode political support in the region. The swift negotiation and the 1 billion shilling pledge can be seen as a political necessity. Critics, however, argue that this is reactive crisis management rather than proactive, strategic reform. They point out that the government has been talking about privatizing or leasing these mills to more efficient operators for years, but progress has been painfully slow. The question becomes, is the government committed to the difficult, long-term restructuring needed, or will it continue with periodic bailouts to quell unrest until the next crisis erupts? We also need to examine the role of the Kenya Union of Sugar Plantation and Allied Workers, KUSPA. The union leadership faced immense pressure. Their members were suffering, and a strike was the ultimate tool. By securing a suspension and a concrete financial pledge, they can claim a victory. But union leaders are also realists. They know the 1 billion shillings is a temporary reprieve. Their challenge now is to hold the government accountable for the disbursement while continuing to advocate for the comprehensive solutions the industry desperately needs. This includes pushing for faster privatization or investment in modernizing the factories to reduce production costs and improve efficiency. The union's next moves will be critical in determining whether this settlement leads to lasting change or just another chapter in a long, sad story. Let's look at some comparative metrics to understand the scale of the challenge. The productivity of Kenya's sugar factories is a major issue. The sugar recovery rate, the amount of sugar extracted from cane, is a key efficiency indicator. In Kenya, this rate hovers around a modest figure, often cited at approximately 8 to 9%. Compare that to more efficient producers in the region and globally, where rates can be 12% or higher. That difference of a few percentage points translates to massive losses in potential revenue over millions of tons of crushed cane. Furthermore, the cost of producing a ton of sugar in Kenya is significantly higher than the import price. This isn't just about debt, it's about fundamental competitiveness. Investing in modern machinery to improve recovery rates is capital-intensive but essential for survival. So, what are the potential paths forward? Experts generally point to a few non-negotiable steps. First, the government must follow through on its long-stated plan to bring in private sector investment and management through leasing or outright sale. The model of Muwani, which was leased, shows some potential, though it's not without its own challenges. Private capital can bring in the needed investment for new equipment and more agile management free from political patronage. Second, there must be a concerted, multi-agency effort to curb illegal sugar imports to give local producers a fair chance. This requires robust enforcement at the ports and borders. Third, support for sugarcane farmers to improve yields and reduce their cost of production is vital. This could include subsidies for inputs, better extension services, and guaranteed minimum prices to ensure their sustainability. The 1 billion shilling pledge, therefore, should not be an end but a bridge. A bridge to buy time for these more substantial reforms to be implemented. If it is merely used to quiet the noise while the underlying problems fester, we will be back here in 6 months or a year, with workers even more desperate and debts even higher. The government has a window of opportunity created by this settlement to demonstrate serious commitment to transformation. It must communicate a clear, transparent, and time-bound roadmap for the revival of these companies. The workers, the farmers, and the nation are watching. In conclusion, the suspension of the sugar workers' strike is a relief, but it is a fragile piece. The pledge of 1 billion shillings addresses a symptom, the unpaid wages, but the disease of systemic failure remains. The numbers don't lie. 10.8 billion in debt, low recovery rates, and high production costs paint a picture of an industry on life support. The resolution of this strike is a test of credibility for the government and a test of resilience for the union and the workers. It is a moment that calls for more than just financial stopgaps. It demands visionary leadership and tough decisions. The sweet taste of this temporary victory will quickly turn sour if it is not followed by the bitter medicine of real reform. The future of Kenya's sugar industry, and the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands, depends on what happens next. For Kenya News Update today, this has been a deep dive into the sugar crisis. We'll continue to follow this story closely. Subscribe to Kenya News Update today for more in-depth analysis and the latest news from across the nation. Good night.